Welcome everyone to session 2. The theme of this session is picking up the threads of 2019. So if you are in the wrong place, I think there's links to the other sessions in the chat. I'm Andrea Goethals from the National Library of New Zealand, and I've also got with me Angela Pugioni for our technical lead. Let's see, there are collaborative notes for this session. So if you want to help take notes, you can join in that and take notes. We're going to be using the chat box for questions. So during the presentations, if you think of questions, just write them in the chat and we'll be looking for that afterwards. We have 5 different presentations today, but I don't think we'll have a problem with time. In case we do, I have a little cowbell to ring if anyone's going over their time. Let's see, first up we have Samaya Langley, who is the Digital Curation Manager, and Ryan Stoker, Research Data Manager from the University of Sydney. And they're going to be talking about indigenizing digital preservation. It's all yours.
Okay, you should see my screen, and I'm just going to try and keep you on another screen. There we go. Okay, so I am Samaya Langley. I'm actually the Digital Curation Specialist at the University of Sydney, and my colleague Ryan Stoker. We've had a bit of a restructure, and my colleague Ryan Stoker is the Digital Collections Librarian, and we're choosing to use the word indigenised rather than decolonising, so that we can focus on the Indigenous rather than on the colonisation. Cool. We want to begin by paying our respects to First Nations on the lands where we are today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, where I am, and the Bedigal people where Ryan is, as well as First Nations around the world. And I'd like to also start by saying I'm not an expert in First Nations. I'm not a First Nations person. I'm immigrant to Australia, and I'm also not an expert in First Nations communities and content. Ryan is of Indigenous heritage. So for me, this is a starting place. I would like to say one of our immediate challenges is this. Our colleague Nathan Moody-Sentence has drafted the library's First Nations cultural protocols. Ryan, myself and our team need to take this document, so this is the theory, and turn it into practice by implementing it in our processes, workflows and existing front-end systems like our Recollect Digital Collections repository, our DAMS, or our DSpace open access repository. But what does that really mean? Elvia Arroyo Ramirez began a discussion of white terminology in digital collecting and digital preservation at the 2016 PASIC conference. And I want to extend on this, requiring us to have a terminology of safety and of care in our preservation activities and current and future systems, and to also influence the wider digital preservation community, for example, the DPC's diversity and inclusion policy. And I had a little bit of an opportunity to feed in that when Sharon McMicken was writing that. We need to talk about equity rather than equality. And this isn't just a need for us all to be technical and to speak the language of ICT. We need to make digital preservation more equitable so that we can enable First Nations to move into the digital preservation field of practice and into our community. The power needs to be in the right place, and that is in the hands of our First Nation colleagues and future colleagues, and while those of us who are more privileged need to shoulder more of the burden. Ryan.
One of the things that was in the protocols and one of the long-term goals is to, as Samaya said, incorporate First Nations ways of thinking and cultural and protocols and ways of doing within our day-to-day work. And for us, that's our digital preservation and digital access. When we talk about implementation and other things around that, around First Nation knowledges, we're often thinking about the front end, the client side. So, for examples, at the moment we're doing a lot of good things here. For instance, with the Library of Congress, they've included traditional knowledge labels, which were developed out of the Washington State University, and incorporated them in their catalogues to provide more information for clients to access those. And likewise, the State Library of New South Wales, I do have to do a bit of call out for them around implementing Mukurtu, so a content management system that allows for communities to safely access and share cultural heritage with libraries and other institutions. And very much access is based around those cultural protocols and traditional knowledge labels. However, whilst we think about these front-end systems, I often feel that sort of the back-of-house systems like our digital preservation management systems are often overlooked. And I feel that with this, it poses some cultural safety risks to both First Nations staff who might be interacting with these materials, particularly culturally sensitive materials, but also staff in general. When we think about things that have in the past have been poorly documented, or if we receive new items with very little information there, there's a risk there of either making inappropriate decisions based on the lack of information or lack of accurate information, and likewise the security side of things, accessing culturally sensitive material that we might not be allowed to access for various reasons. So the question there that I'm sort of posing, and I suppose this is the whole purpose of our talk, is how do we build a respectful back-end preservation system that respects Indigenous or First Nations protocols and ways of doing around access and information. And the whole idea is to bring this to the table today for people to discuss in today's IPRES, but also make this as a bit of a calling out to people who develop these systems as well, and what ways they can consider incorporating this into their future products.
Thank you. And here's a couple of articles and publications if you wish to read. And here are our contact details. And thank you so much to Ryan, because I put our hand up for this and drew Ryan into the process. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samaya and Ryan.
I'm going to disappear to the other stream. I'll be back.
Okay, we'll see you later. All right, Ryan. Does anyone have any questions for Ryan?
Oh, my apologies. I'll be here for the questions since you're asking questions now.
Okay. Well, I could get us started. Do you have any examples? I know you mentioned some of the things that Library of Congress is doing, but some things that you're thinking about potentially doing, especially related to the digital preservation backend.
I think, do you want me to jump in quickly first, Ryan? So I think one of the things that Ryan and I have been talking about is actually around our workflows and simple things like QC checking processes where we're handling secret and sacred material, and it is gender-based material, and that we have a QC checking workflow and QC checking equipment that's actually sitting in an open plan office area so that it isn't secure. And we know that we need to deal with that particular scenario. And that's not even, you know, we're still further up the workflow than the digital preservation side of things. And I think that we're still trying to form our ideas. Like, this is early stages of trying to take that, okay, we've written some things down, but how do you actually apply that? Right. Ryan, did you want to add anything? Because these are really your ideas too. Like, we've developed our thinking collaboratively.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Samaya. But yeah, I think I suppose to provide more context around where we sort of sit at the moment is that we're still very much developing our digital preservation capabilities. As an academic library, we often focus on the access side of things, and now we've gotten to this sort of critical point where we are sort of now having to manage the things that we've digitized for access and managing those into the long term. and particularly now with 2019 and COVID, a lot of people are relying on electronic resources. And in terms of First Nations knowledge as well, a lot of our researchers are either working with communities or they identify as Indigenous themselves, and they're creating their own research there. And often this might end up with us. And I think I did see in the chat here someone asked about collecting and that. But usually it'll end up with either us at the library here or with our archives or museums, depending on the nature of the item. So we're also sort of considering about that and managing that, particularly looking into the long term there.
Yeah, we have several questions, actually, probably more than we can handle now, that have come up in the chat box. And I know that we'll also have time at the end, but let's see. The first one was from Barbara, who asked, is collecting itself a colonizing institution? Or maybe colonizing activity?
So from my very early basic knowledge, yes. These institutions, I mean, the terminology, the word, yes. So I guess what we're also wanting to facilitate is to bring First Nations skills and upskill First Nations people, so that I'm not the person that is the gatekeeper, and that we are facilitating content. And Australia does have a history of this through Paradisic and other organisations of getting content back to communities. We have an example right now where we've got an item that has been asked to be digitised and provided in both print and digital copies from our rare books back to the community, and we will facilitate that process. So I think, yes, we need to question and find, you know, adapt our ways of doing things. Ryan, did you want to add anything?
I think, yeah, I definitely do agree with Samaya there that it is very much a colonising activity, but I suppose it also will very much depend on the nature of that too. So whether or not we're sort of actively collecting, or if it's something that we're required to do under legislation or under various policy requirements. So for instance, with us as a university library, we're required to maintain a collection and be a custodian of a collection of thesis and research data and other publications like that that are sort of created by other people. So you could be collecting that way, and then also there's the sort of going out and purchasing things, which I sort of see as the more colonising side of things there.
Okay, there's a lot of really great questions in the chat, so we can either come back to them at the very end, or if you have time, you can, Ryan or Samaya, you can just answer them directly in the chat. So I want everyone to thank Ryan and Samaya for their presentation. And
thank you. I am going to disappear to the other stream now, so I will, yeah, thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
hopefully we'll see you a little bit later. Okay, so next up we have Harry Bawano, who is a researcher at the National Archives of the Republic of Indonesia, speaking about struggle to inject a wider digital records conceptual framework into the national framework of e-government in Indonesia.
Hello, Andrea. Hello, everyone.
Do you have any slides?
Yes, I will share. Wait. Okay, it's clear?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, greeting from Indonesia, everyone. My name is Harry Bawano, researcher from the National Archive of the Republic of Indonesia. At this time, I will share about the struggle of the National Archive Research Team to inject a wider digital conceptual framework into the national framework of e-government in Indonesia. Now, the policy on e-government in Indonesia has been issued by the e-government since 2003. However, until 2017, the implementation of the government policy has not yet been firmly implemented. To overcome this problem, then our government strengthened this e-government policy by leveling up the regulatory status from a presidential instruction to a presidential regulation in 2018. Besides this regulation, perceived digital record management as one of the domain that get the headlight. And the problem is the digital field is extremely complex than the non-digital, and the digital field is characterized by a wide variety of digital records that are very different than before. With this condition, digital record management methods have evolved very rapidly, both in terms of mindset and practice. However, the dominant actor who steer archival policy in Indonesia has so far only changed the practical level of record management, but not the mindset. Currently, the dominant view within the government agency is only to see record as an official document and equalize it as paper-based records. Therefore, after the issuance of the 2080 e-government regulation, the government focused to compile a guide to official electronic document, while digital records are much more complex than that. Therefore, a wider record management framework is needed to back up the e-government so could run optimally. And this is the battlefield of digital information for type digital record that National Archives should preserve and should manage of all of those digital record. And this is the evolution of record management until now. And in Indonesia, we still focus on phase 2 than phase 3 because it's too hard for us struggling to management and the record management. And then the record management on presidential regulation on government number 95 2018. In this policy, accelerating the implementation of record government is to make the efficiency in public administration realized. In this position, the implementation of a general application for electronic record management is developing by the National Archive. This app will later be imposed to be applied by the government agency so that it can integrate all government agency system, which are 85 national agency, government agencies spread across to 34 province, 500 district and municipal, and 75,000 villages. Then to run the application smoothly, guide to official electronic document is compiled. This guide is a manual for official electronic record that regulate the type of font to be used, the size of the paper, the use of font, or the position a digital signature, for example. On the issue of authenticity, the digital signature scheme is taken as a method to maintain the authenticity of the official electronic record. From this illustration, it can be seen that the framework for managing digital record refers to this regulation is still very narrow. And this is the actor who steer the e-government in Indonesia. The first is the main actor is the Ministry of Administrative and Bureaucratic Reform, the national coordinator, and define how the national framework should be built. And then the National Archive, we support the conceptual framework, policy, and implementation, but it's depend on how the framework made by the Ministry of Administrative. And then the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology, they support the digital infrastructure, and the National Cyber and Crypto Agency, they support the digital security. And then because of the new policy on e-government, before the 2018, the policy of record management is quietly powerless. And then it's changed to the post-2018, the policy that the National Archive have a powerful political backup. And we have changed, so in financial, the National Archive is one of the smallest budget among the government agencies, less than 200 billion a year, or equal to 13 million US dollar a year. And now we have extra support up to 88 billion or 5 million US dollar. And the digital infrastructure, before we self-support our digital infrastructure in digital record management, and then now it's fully supported by Ministry of ICT, and so for the human resource. And I use the Parsons Cybernetic to analyze this problem. In Parsons Cybernetic, the action of person or group of people are determined from the cultural social personality to activity level. The cultural framework determines the person who use it to produce action that are different from people who use different cultural framework. Concerning to this logic, to replace action means to replace the cultural framework. I adapt this pattern into a cybernetic record management action that consists of 3 layers: perspective, function, and record management practices. The perspective contains conceptual assumption about records, and the function contains the placement of records management position in the organizational structure. The practice contains the activities action of managing record at the practical level. The point is record management practice are then determined by the type of perspective that used. And this is current mentioned practice. On the perspective, we are dominant by the office administration, which from the perspective of office administration, record are perceived as official document, that is a document processed by the official application, office application such as .doc or .pdf. This perspective make the function of record management organization in government agency mostly positioned under the Bureau of General Affairs and not under the Information Management Unit. Such a function make record management practice equal to technical administrative activity that focus on arranging record in orderly manner so that they are easier to retrieve. And then why I, as a researcher, concerned about this problem? I am concerned that the office administration perspective currently installed in e-government contain many potential problems if not replaced. First, because of the focus on official document or document created using office application. A variety of other form of the digital record in government agencies will potentially not be managed properly. This can make government agencies lose a lot of their digital asset. Second, the office administration perspective make record management practice too clerically oriented. With the change in managing record to digital, clerical activities can easily be replaced by the app. This potentially will delegitimize the record management organization and the profession of archivists. So it is not surprising for those who use the perspective of office administration questioning some issues. Will archivists still be relevant, or should archivists turn into data scientists? And how to tackling those potential problems. The problem that arise behind the perspective of office administration is that office administration use a paper-based record management framework to manage digital record. This can be dangerous, as Luciana Durante argues. Supposedly, new situation requires a new paradigm according to Bierman. So what has to be done is to change the paper-based paradigm into the digital paradigm, referring to Cook. As with cybernetic scheme, the perspective of managing record must first be changed so that the practice of managing record will also transform. The perspective that fit the context of digital information is informatic record keeping. In this perspective, digital record are perceived as digital asset with many variants. Its perspective notice and cover all variances of digital record as mentioned in previous. In this sense, it is important to maintain the authenticity and the long-term sustainability of digital record, even if all technologically system change later. From this perspective, the function of the record management organization is no longer positioned behind the General Affairs Bureau, but as a unit that motors the managing digital information of its organization instead. In digital information management, the practice of managing record is no longer focused on technical administrative practices, but rather as conceptual substantive practices that focus on ensuring that the digital information compile with the sustainability requirement. And this is strategy that we take to transforming the mindset. The first, we adapting issue to Indonesian standard include the definition of digital record as mentioned before to regulation and consistent spreading the research-based knowledge to internal and external parties and consolidating person who have the same frequency with us. And then transforming the mindset is the key to inject a wider digital record conceptual framework into the national framework of e-government in Indonesia. Thank you. I hope all of us are always healthy and the pandemic will disappear soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Do we have any questions in the chat for Harry? I saw from Louise that you mentioned something that Harry might have the same problem. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Sure. So I was thanks for your talk, Harry. I am ex-National Archives here in Canberra, and the problems of records management always confound, don't they? And in the end, the change management, the people side, which is where I see the link with what's happening in the chat about, the problem of the language, the philosophy we show up in our language, I think, is always so difficult. And I'm constantly intrigued by the way that these change processes always end up being you're sort of selling air to people who don't want it, in a way.
Yeah. it's quietly hard for our team to how to deliver the current perspective of record management in the digital landscape, right? Because especially in the government agencies, that the record management unit is always perceived as just like, oh, it's not a part of very significant in our organization. So they less support. We are a lack of financial support, financial human resource, and other, and so on. And also by this kind of perception behind the dominant of the government, they say that we have to change the record management to the IT unit, or we just replace the archivist into the IT specialist, so we don't need archivists at all, because the mindset behind them is office administration. The record management in their mindset is, record management is just how you to orderly maintain your folder, your file, and then we can easier to retrieve. So but I think it's like a common problem in the global, right?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I wonder if Samaya and Ryan's work, trying to really think about the structure and how you can change the structure, and the conversation that's happening in the chat about changing the problem, the limits of the technology, the way the technology is set up, and the way that it's often anathema to what people want to do and how people want to, and how culture needs to, how we want the environment we want to be part of. And it's quite interesting. It'll be really interesting to see what their work and others who come after them, how that ends up changing the behemoth machines of government record keeping, you know, because my hunch is it will. Thank you. I don't want to hog the conversation.
Thank you.
I'm really bad about cutting this off. But we have a few more presentations. So everyone, thank Harry for his presentation, and maybe we can come back to questions if we have time.
Okay, thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. That was great. Okay, Matthew Burgess from State Library of New South Wales is next going to talk about a reflection on the value of the global digital preservation community.
Thank you. So hopefully everyone can see my screen is the term of the year.
On its way to showing up, I think.
It's just crashed.
It's still black, but for me anyway.
I think if you just cancel it and then try again, it might work. Sometimes does that.
Matthew, are you still there?
It happened. My technical nightmare just happened.
Okay.
Let's see. Apparently I'm in here twice.
We have a choice. We could jump to the next one and come back to you if you want a little bit of time.
Okay, yeah, I just couldn't share the screen because apparently I was sharing my screen. Let me just bring up my slides again and try to take two.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So, hi everyone, my name is Matthew Burgess. For the last 3.5 years, I've been working as a digital collections analyst at the State Library of New South Wales with a focus on digital stewardship for Born Digital Collections. So my talk today is a reflection on the value of the global digital preservation community. So today I'm reflecting on a travel project I was fortunate to undertake in August and September last year. Funded by the Gordon Darling Foundation and supported by the State Library of New South Wales, this allowed me to travel to Europe for the first time and visit organisations across the United Kingdom, Ireland, and culminating in attending my first IPRES in Amsterdam. So my research project aimed to investigate how cultural institutions abroad are acquiring, preserving, and providing access to Born digital collections. As an early career practitioner, this was an exceptional opportunity to meet and learn from professionals on the other side of the world by visiting galleries, libraries, archives, and museums and discussing challenges, workflows, tools, and progress in dealing with complex Born digital collections. I appreciate the knowledge and the time, I acknowledge the time, experiences, and knowledge shared with me by those who facilitated and participated in my visits. I would also like to thank the National Library of Ireland for an invitation to Dublin and the Digital Preservation Coalition for facilitating communication with their members. Picking up on the threads of 2019, it's strange to think of my travels in our current world climate. This year, I've only left home to go to the office once a week over the last month. While on this day last year, I was boarding a plane back home to Sydney after visiting 20 organisations across 5 cities over 4.5 weeks. This project included a lot of firsts for me. So my first time applying for a grant, my first time traveling overseas solo, and first time conducting professional visits with other organisations. My itinerary included London, Edinburgh, Glasgow, Amsterdam, and Dublin, a speedy introduction to each city with limited time for exploration outside of appointments and IPRES. To guide discussions during my visits, I developed a set of research questions to help understand and identify digital preservation practices, challenges, and objectives. This was influenced by my work at the State Library, as well as the Digital Preservation Peer Assessment Template from the Northeast Document Conservation Centre that provides questions to prompt staff at cultural heritage institutions to think critically about their digital preservation activities. Discussions on working with Born digital collections and digital preservation during my trip were diverse, from corporate archives, museums, galleries, university or government libraries, and everything in between. It was interesting to see where each organisation was in their digital preservation journey and how that related to the Australian context and the State Library of New South Wales. Topics discussed included the significance of physical outputs from digital design processes, sharing and documentation of knowledge within teams, particularly on project-based activities, ingest workflows and digital preservation infrastructure, strategies and organisational commitments to digital preservation, sensitivity of records in corporate archives, complexities of working in environments of continual change, creation of policies and other first steps to drive cultural change within organisations, how digital objects are seen in organisations with long history of managing physical objects, challenges with implementation of digital preservation systems, making Born Digital part of everyday normal processes, digital preservation as an environment or a combination of people, processes, software and tools, and seeking accreditation as a driver for digital preservation. Whether it's copyright, access rights or technical problems, access to Born Digital collections was identified as a challenge for everyone. The use of digital preservation systems for both preservation and access was highlighted as an issue, as well as the requirement for resourcing to tackle the ubiquitous backlog of Born Digital collections that require action. The last question I asked on my visits was whether the organisation was involved in any digital preservation communities of practice or collaborative projects outside of their organisation, and if so, how beneficial they are. Every organisation was involved in some form of community of practice or collaborative project, highlighting their importance and benefit. It also showed in how generous everyone was with both their time and knowledge. While some of my visits were only for an hour or two or half a day, there was also several visits where I spent the entire day with just one visit. Those with digital preservation systems engaged with their associated user community, noting the benefits of sharing experiences and joint lobbying for roadmap enhancements from suppliers. Outside of organisational memberships, collaborative and research projects were also discussed. Many were members of the Digital Preservation Coalition or expressed interest in becoming one. Membership was highlighted as beneficial for those at the start of their digital preservation journey with consultancy and training, while for others it provided an opportunity to share their knowledge and collaborate with the community in working groups and committees. Australasia Preserves came up as part of discussions on communities of practice during my visits, which is a digital preservation community of practice for the Australasian region. With members from a wide range of domains across Australia and New Zealand, it was established in 2018 by the University of Melbourne, where the need for a community of practice in our region was evident from that very first meeting. Over the last 2 years, it has facilitated networking, collaboration, connection, and learning over our wide geographic area. As a co-organiser, it was great to hear that there was interest in what we have been doing on the other side of the world. And it's also an indication that while a community of practice may be local in its aim, it can be very much global in its reach. Despite the challenges we have all faced over the last 12 months, progress has still been made within the global digital preservation community to connect and share. The Digital Preservation Coalition has opened an Australasian office in Melbourne earlier this year, and here we are today online in lieu of a face-to-face conference discussing digital preservation. My experience with the global digital preservation community over the last 2 years, and particularly during my travels last year, has been welcoming and inclusive, often backed up by codes of conduct that highlight we are a diverse community from a wide range of social, cultural, and professional backgrounds. Sharing your work with the community provides an opportunity to reflect. Hearing about projects, tools, and processes from others can also reinforce learnings, strengthen decisions, or provide avenues for further investigation within your own context. There is value on both personal and organisational levels to invest time, resources, and commitment to collaboration and to our global digital preservation community. As William Kilbride noted during my visit with the DPC prior to iPres last year, digital preservation is a global problem that we cannot solve on our own. The opportunity to meet so many engaging experts in the field of digital preservation and digital collecting across the United Kingdom, Netherlands, and Ireland in 2019 was an undeniable privilege. Scheduling iPres at the tail end of my travels was very much rewarding, where a lot of those I met along the way were also in attendance. The global digital preservation community of practice is an important resource for us all, so thank you everyone for being a part of it and sharing your knowledge and experience. And finally, a big thank you to everyone involved in organising and running this week's activities. So thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Sounds like an amazing trip.
Yeah, it's very strange to think of it.
Yeah, I know. I was like, what's travel?
Yeah.
Um, let's see. I think we have time for one question. I don't see any in the chat, but I might be missing one. Let's see. Give you all a second in case you're typing. If not, Matthew, is there anything you do differently now that you're back in Australia because of your trip?
Not necessarily. There were some ideas I kind of picked up from other organizations that I was planning to not necessarily implement, but try out here. But COVID kind of put a stop to that. So one example is I spent some time at Wellcome Collection and basically had a day with staff from there. There were also some other visiting researchers from Japan. And it was kind of a day of Born Digital discussion. They kind of highlighted how beneficial that was internally. So that was beneficial for me, it was beneficial for the Japanese researchers, but it was very much beneficial for their own staff to hear from people from different areas of the organization, people who don't normally get to talk to each other. And I thought it would be, that kind of raised the possibility of me organizing basically a Born Digital day of discussion, but internally within my organization, to highlight the work that people are doing and to kind of raise some things that did come up as part of my research trip and say, oh, you know, these people were doing this, which looks really interesting. Is that something that we could look at? So there were a few things like that, but that unfortunately haven't happened due to COVID. I mean, that is probably something that could happen on a platform like Zoom now, but yeah, that was kind of put on the back burner.
Yeah, I guess you have some time to plan it now.
Yeah.
Lots of time to plan it now. Everyone join me in thanking Matthew for his presentation. However you'd like to, virtual clap, physical clap. Next up we have Louise Curum and Lin Lu. Louise is from the Center for Creative and Cultural Research at the University of Canberra, and Lin Lu is an artist, filmmaker, and conservationist, speaking about a letter to a user.
Okay, I'll start. Hi all, thanks for having us. It's very early in the morning for Lynn. She's in London. She's gotten up at the crack of dawn to be with us. Are you there, Lynn?
Yes, I'm here.
Good, I just want to be sure you're there. It's one of
Hi,
the tricks of
everyone.
Zoom. Yeah. Okay. So I want to acknowledge that I'm here in Canberra, which is Ngunnawal Ngambri country, and this is a place with an immensely long history of cultural work, and I'm humbled to be here in these strange digital spaces that we've become so accustomed to, and we're still following in that history. So I'm going to just turn over to our slides. So there we are, we've got our letter to a user. And Lynn and I, hang on, I have to share my screen, don't I? Forgot about that. Right, here we are. Okay, so just let me get this together. Okay, so there we are. So Lynn and I have been working together in the last while. Following in the work that I've been doing, exploring what analog media performance has got to teach the digital. And what we want to share with you today is some work we did with an exhibition we had in Canberra last year, where we devised a letter to a future user about an artwork of Lynn's that is based around analog performance. So Lynn makes live performances using 16mm film, and one of those works is called Autumn Fog. And what Lynn and I agreed to do was make some instructions for Autumn Fog and then commission a bunch of artists to try them out over the duration of the exhibition and to get them to refine the instructions. And what emerged from that process was that a really important ingredient in those instructions was the letter that Lynn wrote. And you can see it there on the screen with the annotations from one of the users of the instructions. And what the letter does is it both sets the parameters, so it sort of says some things that are important to Lynn about the work. But what I observed it doing when it was used by the other artists was that it behaves like an invitation. So it makes them feel like they've got permission to take up Lynn's piece. And that important, so what I wrote in my notes is it invoked and imagined future users in a way that most artworks don't. And to us that seemed, so it seemed in conversation, Lynn and I felt like this idea is really quite important. So Lynn makes these film performances. I myself make similar kinds of film performance using Super 8. We both work in the field of archives. Lynn works in preservation at the BFI in film. We share an audiovisual preservation background, and there's various other bits of archives that I've been involved in. So we were both really intrigued by the way that this invite to an imagined, speaking directly from now to the future in that way, struck us as something. We were intrigued by how important that seemed to be to this group of users. So that's what we want to share with you today. So I think I've sort of briefly explained how Autumn Fog works, how these instructions work. And the impetus was, there was two parts to making the instructions. One was so that Autumn Fog could be shown now without Lynn. So she could have that work go around the world without her. But we were both, because we both deal in the future as archivists, we were also intrigued by what that might mean in the long term when she's not around anymore. And so what is Autumn Fog? Just briefly, it's a 15-minute performance, and there's one screen of negative image and one screen of positive image, and they both sit together. And during the performance, the artist intervenes on the images, blocking out the light, blocking out some of the film and revealing others. And my description of it is that it ends up being a 15-minute stereoscopic quivering meditation. So it's really a beautiful experience. I'm sure, yeah. So that's what the work consists of. So it's got this live element to it. And Lynn and I both share the view that the recorded experience of Autumn Fog as a video piece, it's a different work, an altogether different work. So in these slides here, you're seeing Lynn, us working together, devising, Lynn teaching me how to perform Autumn Fog and us devising the first iteration of the score. And the score evolved from a word table into a flip book with haiku poems. And we brought in different artists to test it. So let me move forward and once I've said most of these things. Okay, so something that's really important for you to kind of connect with here is that part of what we did together was I was there in person. So I learned from Lynn in person, and that informed what we put in the score. So Lynn could see me as a student of her work, and she could think about what I needed to know, and she could put that into her first draft of that score. But it's not so much the process or the specifics of what we did. I really want to come back to this, to the letter. So we'll just move forward through these slides, and here's the letter. And so this is where Lynn is going to join our conversation. So now I'm going to stop being the formal telling you all about this, and Lynn and I are now going to try and have a conversation, if we can, about this. So I asked Lynn to write that letter, and in the opening email I said, could you give a letter of invitation from you to the manual user? And I explained to how this had come about from my own practice of working with other people's artwork, which is something I've done quite a lot. and a sense of how the original artist feels about the work having a life without them. So of course, some of this was solved for me working with Lynn's piece because I was there in person. So part of what I was interested in was trying to find a way for Lynn to build in some of her attitude towards her work to pass on to a future user when she wasn't there. So then here's the first question we were talking about is, can you reflect on the letter wearing your artist's hat?
Right, I've written the answer, so I'm going to read it out. So as Louis mentioned, I wanted to find a way for someone other than myself to perform the work, and Autumn Folk can only be experienced live. Having learned from Louise how various artists and individuals had carried out our initial score, I felt that there was something missing in our communication. Hence, this has Louise suggests to write the letter directly to the user felt like a turning point for me. So writing the letter allowed me to break down barriers with the future user or performer and express directly how I felt the work might be performed while recognizing their individual responses. So
yeah, it's interesting. So it's, and for me that makes really great sense because it's that, yeah, the barrier of being present and the privilege of someone like me being there, able to be there in the flesh and to form that relationship with you. So then because we share this preservation hat, the other question that we discussed was, that's you reflecting on it wearing your artist hat. So what about wearing your preservation hat? Do you want to respond to that?
I can try. So talking in terms of preservation, I remember this phrase, someone said, removing the artist from the work, which is often used in preservation process of an artwork. So, but using, with that phrase, this approach does not allow for certain kinds of live performances. So the aim of this letter, I find, the aim of this letter, therefore, is for me to be included in that preservation process. So the letter intends to encourage the future user, having familiarized themselves with my thinking, to make their own interpretation of the work while staying within the constraints of the score.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think that thing about the traditional approach of conservation, where you're trying to remove the artist in a way so that the work can stand alone. I think that this effort to bring the artist with the work feels really constructive and help, has, yeah. So the other thing that we spoke about was there was an aspect that was about technology and how the letter, do you want to say something about that?
Oh yes, yeah, when we're doing this, as you mentioned, in the future, we don't know how the technology, because this piece uses film projectors, and there will be possibility that the user might use different kind of technology. So in this letter, I hope it recognizes that possibility and expresses the essential nature of the work. So in that sense, I'm open to interventions of how it's presented, but hoping to keep the flow of the work, I guess the essence of it. So that the letter is, it helps the way for me to think how to carry on, how the piece can carry on to another person. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but We're running out of time because we have one more presentation to get to before we move to the next part of the program. Is there?
We're done. That's it. What we want you to take from this is just this idea that this is a way to bring the maker, whoever that maker might be. It's possibly relevant to indigenizing the collections conversation in some ways, is bringing something of the essence forward with it and something of the artist with it, rather than trying to divorce them from the work.
Yeah.
And also this idea of the artist in the present, the maker at the time, having a chance to talk to the future, which
Right.
seems an unusual move. So I think those were really the main things we wanted you to take from our talk. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Would everybody join me in thanking Louise and Lynn? And Lynn, I appreciate it because I know it's not a great hour for you to be here. So thank you. Okay, so next up we have Sarah Middleton, who is the head of advocacy and community engagement at the Digital Preservation Coalition. And she is going to present the progress toward the future of iPres.
I am. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay, so yes, I'm Sarah Middleton. Hello. I work for the DPC, but I'm presenting today on behalf of the iPres working group, which is actually made up of volunteers from across our digital preservation community, all of whom are interested in improving the accessibility, diversity, inclusivity and transparency of iPres as a conference and a community. So we've talked a lot about community in this stream so far, so hopefully that we'll build on that just now. So the working group itself is quite a large bunch of people with a number of ad hoc members too, and the membership has certainly changed since we last took our roll call. But the members as they were in 2019 when the working group was established can be found in the public working group folder, which you can see the link to on the screen. But more on that and more on the membership of the working group in a moment. There we go. So I'll pick up on the threads from 2019. For those of you who didn't attend the conference or the community panel in particular there, or haven't been engaged in the work towards the future of iPres today, it might not be immediately obvious what I'm talking about, the future of iPres. So what does that mean? I'll fill you in by going back a year when this group of community members who wanted to improve accessibility, inclusivity, transparency, as I say, and to make sure that the community of iPres was truly representative of all of those people around the world who are practicing or even just thinking about digital preservation. So to that end, the iPres working group was formed, and it began by asking the community for their thoughts and ideas about iPres, what that should be, how it should operate, how it should be managed to make sure it meets these objectives of inclusion and diversity. And this process began with a review of the current iPres Charter and a Future of iPres survey in the spring last year. The outcomes of these two community consultations were presented alongside a set of recommendations at iPres 2019 in Amsterdam. There had been 81 responses, which was great, and these led to 13 recommendations, which covered everything from the programme and proceedings to governance and hosting. And I must note that since then there has been a slowdown of activity somewhat with the pandemic, but a small group has been continuing to make progress since we settled into this new normal. And nevertheless, it's always been the intention to continue coordinating with interested individuals and groups to make sure that issues and concerns are heard and included in these recommendations. But the recommendations, what are they? Well, these are they. I won't read all 13 word for word because well, I now have about 3 minutes, but I'll briefly summarise. So the purpose, the community said that iPres should be diverse and inclusive, and this purpose should be well communicated. On principles and values, the community wanted iPres to have a published statement of values which supports these objectives of diversity, inclusion, etc., as well as an updated and implemented standard code of conduct for all conferences. On governance and elections, the community said that iPres should continue to have a governing body, the roles for which could be elected and should be allocated to ensure diversity and reflect a broad range of skills, and that the iPres Charter should be updated to reflect this. On transparency, the community said they'd like to see more of the processes, papers and organising activities shared online and more opportunities to engage with the governing body. On hosting and access, the community wanted to see more community engagement when it came to location selection for conferences, thinking more about geographic diversity, political climates, accessibility with ease, regards to ease of travel, physical access to spaces and appropriateness of facilities. And we've talked a lot about that in the social gatherings over the last 2 days. And big thumbs up to live streaming of some or all of the sessions, and we know that works well now. On the programme, the community wanted to see steps to increase participation from underrepresented groups and countries, developing and adopting guidelines for a diverse and balanced conference programme. About proceedings, they wanted to see things that were representative of all sessions and content included at the conference, so not just papers, but posters, recordings, community note-taking, things like that. Creation of the IPRES working group to address these recommendations. So I can tell you that the continuation of the IPRES working group was approved, consolidated into 5 main action areas, and I hope you can see those on the screen here as the kind of the headings in this blue box. So this is actually taken from a screenshot from our new IPRES working group wiki page. So this is one of the new exciting items of progress to report, so you can go and visit that there. So yeah, these 5 action areas are purpose and convening and sharing and the future of IPRES. And you can find out more about each of these on the wiki, the URL for which you can see on the screen now. But if it's a bit long, complicated, just go to wiki.dpconline.org and select the IPRES. Progress against the recommendations here and provide links to documents which are in progress so that the community can provide comments and feedback. Which brings me to the next items of progress to report, because we have a new draft statement of principles, a new draft code of conduct, and a new draft governance and election framework, which is ready for community review. So the statement of principles is overarching and refers to the whole of the community and the conferences. The code of conduct draws from groundwork laid at IPRES 2018 in Boston and picked up and such as Australasia Preserves and the DPC. And the governance and election framework provides an outline process for moving towards a governing body which reflects the whole of the community, as we've been talking about. So these are all available for you to look at through the IPRES Working Group Wiki and ready for community review now. But how can you contribute? Well, there are 2 main ways really. So you can join the IPRES interest group, and I recommend you do that to find out how to provide your feedback on the draft documents. And you can do that, so the email address is there, but the link to subscribe is also provided. It's also a long kind of complicated one, so I'll provide another way to do that in a minute. But through this email list, the IPRES working group will share regular updates, including an action plan for developing the rest of the recommendations, with the aim being to have all of this work complete by IPRES 2021 in Beijing. And you can also get more involved if you wish, and we'd like you to, please. So we'd like you to join the IPRES working group itself and help develop or review the processes and documentation which will help to progress these recommendations. So the action plan for progressing the recommendations will likely see 5 subgroups, each working on one of the action areas, and these groups will convene and work collaboratively to develop the processes and documentation required before passing back out to reviewers and back out to the community for kind of review, comment, acceptance, etc. And in the run-up to We Miss IPRES, there was a renewed call for participation in the IPRES working group on the IPRES interest group email list. And I'd like to extend that invitation to everybody here at We Miss IPRES too. So please do join us and join the conversation. Because the intention of the working group is to end up with, as I said earlier, right at the start, with an IPRES community and a conference which is diverse, inclusive, open and transparent. And the only way to achieve that is to continue our work on inclusion and diversity by creating a truly diverse global network of community representatives who are working on these outcomes. and supporting each other. So that means people from all corners of the globe. It means people from all sorts of different organisation types, people from networks which are allied and affiliated with digital preservation, people at all stages of their careers. So you might not think you're qualified to join us, but you are, because you have a perspective to bring. We want to hear from people who've been to IPRES once, twice, 16 times, people who've never been to IPRES at all. Everybody is welcome for the different perspectives they can bring and the contributions they can make. So first job, please, after this, here we go. This is how to find out more. Join the IPRES interest group to hear about more about how to get involved, and please help us to work towards the future of IPRES. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. So if somebody does want to join the working group, is that call, should they go to the interest group?
If you just sign up for the email list, the interest group email list, and pop us a note, or you can email me directly. I mean, I'm on all the channels. We'll get that to you and get you looped in.
Okay, cool.
I'll stop sharing so I can see you, because it's a bit disconcerting.
Yeah, I'm looking to my tech lead to know if we have time for one question or not. No, we don't.
That's
Sorry.
fine. You know where I am.
But yeah, Sarah, if you get a chance to look at the questions for you in the chat, you'll see there's a couple for you there. Everybody join me in thanking Sarah for her presentation.
Thank you, everybody.
And next we move into a break.